Here it is, guys, right at a month away. The Advocate Classic will take place between the Auburn Tigers and the Oregon Ducks. But some unfinished business first. You got to go through the fall camps before you can even think about what will take place in Arlington, Texas. But there are a lot of moving parts in the regards to the preparation. And one of the best matchups, I think, will be between the Oregon offensive line and the Auburn defensive line. Mario Cristobal and Kevin Steele have history and ties together. Kevin Steele, as a defensive coordinator at the University of Alabama in 2013, also there was Mario Cristobal. Mario Cristobal also hung around Alabama until 2016, actually helping to win a 2015 national championship. Mario Cristobal spoke a lot of some of the schematics of Kevin Steele, about how he likes to play around with the safeties on first and second down. And when you're in the red zone against Kevin Steele, and you'll see this in some of the highlights that I have shown in this particular video, it's zero coverage. It's straight man. As a matter of fact, in the LSU game, even Gary Danielson said the middle is wide open. They're going straight man. And that's something that Kevin Steele tends to do. And when you're coaching, especially with someone, and then you wind up being opposing coaches to one another, one of the advantages for both sides is not only do you know their schematics, but you know how they coach. You know how they get the players prepared and the mindset and the psychology behind what they do. And everyone knows that Kevin Steele plays a very aggressive form of defense that has been very beneficial for the Auburn Tigers, as during his tenure, he has only allowed, as a collective whole, less than 20 points per game. On the other hand, Mario Cristobal has a wealth of talent on his offensive line, and he expects to display that coming into this particular season. And one thing about this particular group that stands out to me, outside of their size, outside of their physicality, outside of the pancake blocks that one of my subscriber, Derek Luke, likes to talk about, that he can't wait to see. The thing that I look at with this particular offensive line is the experience factor and the togetherness factor. On the offensive line at left tackle, you got Penei Sewell. You got Shane Lemieux, you got Jake Hansen, Dallas Warmack, Calvin Throckmorton. Now, when I look at these guys, especially when I look at, because Penei Sewell is the youngest of the group, I look at Shane Lemieux, Jake Hansen, Dallas Warmack, and Calvin Throckmorton. These guys have played together for the entirety of their careers. They are all redshirt freshmen. It appears that they come in together. And one thing you can't discount when you're talking about ability, when you can team up that ability with experience and experience together, it makes for a very, very lethal combination, especially in college football. And I think that's something that's not talked on enough, is the experience factor. And that's something that, we definitely want to look at when we come into the Advocate Classic, as Auburn gets ready to take on Oregon, and likewise for the Oregon Ducks. Now, Oregon Ducks offensive line has publicly displayed, say, hey, we respect these guys. We know that they're going to be one of the better defensive lines that we're going to play probably all year. And one thing about Auburn's defensive line is they have proven to be very aggressive over the years. And, just very, very productive. Usually when you have a successful Auburn defense, it's when the buck linebacker position can produce, 10 or more tackles for loss and nine or so sacks. When you have that in place, that's the key area where you can find a very successful Auburn defense, because you found it in 2017. They didn't necessarily run the buck situation in 2013, but since Kevin Steele has been there in 2017, that's where you find the success. Now, when we look at this defensive line for the Auburn Tigers, you got Derek Brown, who is a senior, Marlon Davidson, who was a senior, and Nick Coe, who was a junior. Marlon Davidson and Derek Brown have really done a great job of solidifying this defensive line. They've been in the big games. They've been in the neutral site games. They played against your Alabamas, your Georgias. Also had 2 times where they played against Clemson and performed very well against eventual college football playoff teams. So these guys as well have a wealth of experience that you just can't discount. And that's why this matchup between the Oregon Ducks and the Auburn Tigers at the line of scrimmage is probably going to be one of the more intriguing matchups to begin the season. One thing about it, Oregon does a great job of protecting their quarterback, so it's going to be a stalemate. It's going to be, something has to give type situation, because you have 2 very talented and 2 very experienced groups. And I don't want you guys to discount that. Very talented, very experienced. They played together. They know each other's tendencies. They know what gets one down and what picks the other back up. These are all factors that the media are not projecting when they talk about the outcomes of teams. Because I'll just use Florida, for example. Florida is going to be, going to have to piece together some things on the offensive line. Yet, media outlets have already declared that they will make a high-level run at the SEC East. We can't really factor in that Michigan game wholeheartedly, because Michigan had a few guys missing as they declared, for the NFL. So, and that's not to discount what Florida brings to the table, but we can't denounce the experience factors of some of the teams that are not quite getting the love in the offseason that some others are. And a lot of this love is being predicated even on recruiting classes. Now, I understand, yes, recruiting classes are important, but it takes a while for these guys to develop. Just because you're a 5-star athlete doesn't mean that's going to immediately transfer over into college football, Power 5 football play. So I think a lot of emphasis, maybe even naively, is being placed on recruiting classes, which, that's fine and good. But I think we need to get back to where we're giving real deal analysis based on what really is going to be a factor going into the season. So as we switch gears over to the University of Georgia. And one thing that we talk about as it relates to Kirby Smart and Georgia and his tenure at the University of Georgia is high levels of success. Great recruiting classes, has changed the total trajectory of how Georgia football is viewed in the media. Definitely a great perception of their program, playing with a lot of tenacity and with a lot of confidence. There are some detractors, though. One of the main thing that Georgia has to do this year, and this is going to be another difficult task, is when we look in November for the Georgia Bulldogs, they have to take the trip over to Auburn and then have to come back home to what is usually a FCS team or a non-Power 5 team, but you come back home to have to face Texas A&M. And in Kirby Smart tenure, one of the detractors during the regular season is the fact that he has yet to beat an SEC West team on the road. And this year, obviously having the rival Auburn in Auburn, where they definitely didn't play very well there in 2017, definitely will have to correct some of the mistakes. When Georgia plays these games, they make like some of the most uncharacteristic mistakes that you can possibly even dream up. I think in that particular game, when you look back at it, the 2017 game in Auburn, when Miko Hardeman fumbled that punt, that began the onslaught for Auburn. Very uncharacteristic, really got the momentum going for the Auburn Tigers, and it was no turning back for Auburn. They just went on a roll to a 40-17 win. The following year, going down to Baton Rouge and struggling mightily with the LSU Tigers. We can like it or love it. LSU is a hard place to play, But either way, you're talking about being, getting over the hump to being one of the elite status teams in college football. Those are games you absolutely have to win. By and large, that loss to LSU cost Georgia an opportunity to have a case. I think by the end of last year, Georgia arguably was a top 4 team in the country. And outside of the LSU loss, it would have been very justifiable to place Georgia as a college football playoff team. But with a loss on the road, a double-digit loss on the road to a SEC West team, and you got to think subconsciously in the back of the voters' minds, this is something that has happened. This is a hump that you just can't get over. This is something definitely that Kirby Smart will have to do to prove that he's not sliding back results-wise as to what Mark Richt did. I'm by no stretch of the imagination comparing Kirby Smart to Mark Richt, because I think he has surpassed the expectations. He's recruited very well. But now the questions are starting to murmur a little bit. Can Kirby Smart get over the hump? College football playoff appearance, seconds away, overtime away from potentially winning that particular football game. And it's not getting easier. The path to the SEC championship for Georgia is not getting any easier as time progresses. You have coaching upgrades. You got Dan Mullen down at Florida, who's recruiting very well. Played Georgia pretty decently. I wouldn't say, had a chance to win, but played Georgia pretty decently. You got an emergence with the potential of Missouri with Kelly Bryant, former Clemson quarterback, who's going to be up there. And it's just not going to be as cut and dry and just a smooth sailing as it has been in the immediate past for the Georgia Bulldogs. So now, in my opinion, I think it's put up or shut up time for Kirby Smart. Now, don't get me wrong. He has everything. He has a good roster, but he has some things in place that are still unproven. Of course, the mass exodus of the wide receiver position definitely doesn't help the cause of the Georgia Bulldogs. So Kirby Smart this year, it's a lot of question marks. You got the game against Notre Dame at home. That's going to be a signature game. Then you got the stretch with Florida, Missouri, and then that brutal stretch in November with Auburn and Texas A&M. It's really going to be questionable this year, especially with how this schedule is set up. If Georgia even makes it back to the SEC championship. I'm not saying that, that's a bold statement to make, but this is not an easy schedule. I want all the SEC college football fans who are just casually looking at this thing. Georgia does not have an easy football schedule. They have the roster potentially to make it happen, but you talk about changes in, the offensive coordinator. You got a lot of different factors going on to where this is just not an easy fix for the Georgia Bulldogs. So we want to look out for them. This is Auburn football sports talk. Kennard Vernon Stewart here on the podcast once again. And go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep the videos pumping. This was just a recap of the offensive line versus defensive line for Auburn and Oregon, respectively. Advocare Classic coming real soon. And we just wanted to touch on a little bit of Kirby Smart and his tenure at Georgia. Until next time, it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger on this channel. War Eagle.